This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by BetterHelp. Prioritize your well-being. If you need support along the way, BetterHelp has got you covered. Visit betterhelp.com/Gators and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gators.
We got Gators Breakdown here. We know we're business.
Gators Breakdown. Because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The intro still has Billy Napier in it. I did ask Will before we came live here, should I keep it? And I think we both agreed till it happens, he'll be in the intro. Hey, I'm David Waters, host of Gators Breakdown, right here, Will Miles on Monday night. You can follow me at GatorDave_SEC on social media. Follow Will, readreaction.com at Will Miles SEC on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days. There we go. Plenty to discuss. Will, you got to talk to Hadley, my daughter, for about a few minutes before we came live here.
I did. It was a great press conference. I told you it was more interesting than watching some of what Billy said today during his press conference. So we'll go over it, but I'm sure there will be some. We will try. We will keep it professional here. That's the promise that I made you. So we'll do that.
Yeah, we've gotten lauded for that too, by the way, for how we've been handling all of this the last couple of weeks. Of course, we all know what the conversation will be and is, and everything surrounding Billy Napier's job status at Florida. We'll get into him. He was asked about it today in his press conference. We will certainly get into that. Can't dig our head in the sands. We know what's going on, but still some football games being played as well. So, the football aspect will be discussed as much as possible. But we know right now, just coming off another loss to Texas A&M, Will, that just not heading in the right direction. Doesn't look like it will ever head in the right direction. And it's unfortunate we're here, but it looks like the writing is pretty much on the wall right now with Billy Napier.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking for years now that when you're a coach, you sell hope and you sell wins, and we don't have either left, right? I mean, the reality is that there are not any wins in the quiver. It doesn't look like, and certainly we all know what's coming on the back end of the schedule. And then the hope was DJ Lagway, but was also beyond that. It was improvement in year 3. It was the culture. It was putting all those things in place that Napier has been talking about. Napier, it's not like Napier went out and said, this is going to be a rough year during the tours he was doing during the offseason. This is the best team I've had in Gainesville. This team is ready to deliver on some of those promises. And he just, he was wrong. This is not a good football team. They're ranked 91st in points per, or in yards per play gained. So the offense is bad. They're ranked 122nd in yards per play allowed against FBS opponents. And look, Miami and A&M are good teams, maybe. I don't think either of them is great. And there's a couple of great ones coming up on the schedule. So, Florida's in for a tough one coming up here, and everybody knows that's what's coming. So then it's just a question of, all right, like what is the next step? Because at this point, the hope that the program is heading in the right direction just isn't there. And, I went into I picked Florida over Miami sort of hoping that we would see a step, not because I actually thought that's what was going to happen. And
begrudgingly a little bit.
Yeah. And then Florida got absolutely smoked. And then I picked A&M by more than 2 touchdowns this weekend because Florida's in prove-it mode at this point, right? I mean, Napier was in prove-it mode coming in. You've said they've been in prove-it mode now pretty much for the entire season. And what they're proving is that they're not a very good football team. And, I don't know whether I'm going to pick them over Mississippi State. Like, Mississippi State got boat raced by Toledo this past weekend?
Yeah. Played Arizona State pretty good the week before, but still, yes, you don't get boat raced by Toledo.
I mean, if I told you that you had to bet your mortgage on the Mississippi State-Florida game, or you could sit it out. You make $3 million if you bet your mortgage on Florida, or you sit it out. What are you doing, Dave?
See, that's a good question. And when you watch my game prediction episodes, if it's, and I've always admitted this, if it's close to 50-50, I let my orange and blue glasses take over. But if I was going to Vegas, going to your point, if I was going to Vegas, that's tough right now. And given some history right now, I'm probably going Mississippi State. I will sit here and say on Monday, we can't. I mean, Florida's been awful at home, lately. We can't forget about the road woes. I mean, Billy Napier's been, don't get me wrong, the whole tenure's been awful, but it's been even worse on the road.
Well, we haven't seen the special teams gaffes because they haven't gone on the road yet. That's the one thing that hasn't fallen apart, but that most of those special teams mistakes have been on the road. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a like I remember at the end of the Jim McElwain era saying it was like I think against the Michigan in the Michigan opener there in 2017. I was like, that was a total system failure, and I feel like that's what we've seen in the Miami and the Texas A&M games. The Samford game, okay. I mean, we all talked about it like but Samford, and it turned out anybody who said but Samford was correct.
Yeah.
The minute a real team was on the other side, Florida no longer looked like a major college football program. I mean, Florida's looked like a cupcake in the 2 games they played so far. Again, I mean, that first half was ridiculous. What was it? 370 or 302 to 73. And
they had more yards on their first drive after halftime than they did the whole first half.
Well, and that's only because A&M stopped caring. Like,
oh yeah, they knew the game was over.
Pack it up, don't get injured, and let's get home. There were 6 explosive plays for A&M in the first half to 1 for Florida. And on the one where Florida got the explosive play to DK, a 39-yard pass to DK, they still managed to punt. Like, and again, this sort of goes
how many times have you heard one explosive play leads to points?
Well, so last week I misspoke and I went on some giant rant about how Billy Napier scared money don't make money up in Wisconsin is what I said. I meant Tennessee in 2022, and he was going for it on 4th down all the time, like in his own territory, and I lauded him for it at the time. And I went back and looked at that article, and the reason Florida was in that game is because he found a bunch of different edges. Sometimes the 4th down worked, sometimes the 4th downs worked, sometimes they didn't. And that guy's gone. Like the guy who's a riverboat gambler, the guy who goes out there and says, my defense can't stop anybody and I'm going to trust my offense. The guy who goes, you know what? Like, I'm either going to ride with Mertz or I'm going to ride with Lagway. Like, that guy's gone. And the alternating quarterbacks where he put in Lagway with like 40 seconds left and goes, that's your drive. And then the first drive of the second half, Graham Mertz is out there again. It's like, if you're going to do that to Lagway, just have Mertz out there for the last 50 seconds.
Yeah.
Give him 3 straight drives and go on. So, look, everything that he does at this point is under a microscope in some capacity, except for I'm not even sure it's under the microscope anymore, because we've gone from, you think about like the stages of grief, and we've gone from bargaining to at some point you get to acceptance, and then you get to apathy. Like apathy comes afterwards, at least when it comes to college football. And we're kind of there in many cases. Like the fan base got mad after the Miami game. I sensed it was less mad after the A&M game. And I don't know what the reaction is going to be after this Mississippi State game if it turns out to go the wrong way for the good guys. And, I find it hard to root against Florida. Like, I don't want to actively root against the team. But I'm also finding it hard to find things to root for Florida right now. And that's a tough place to be in as an analyst, but it's certainly a tough place to be in as a fan.
Yeah, it was funny. I was talking to my South Carolina buddy today, my buddy Jason that I work with, and he's going on vacation this week, so we said our goodbyes for the week and stuff like that. And he was like, yeah, good luck to you Gators this week. And I was like, yeah, it's like, I always want to see the team win. I was like, but, there is a silver lining to a loss. That's kind of the way you have to look at it. As you said, never. I want Florida to win this weekend. But even then, I get the sense from talking to a lot of the fan base, even a win won't mean a whole lot because you kind of still know what's coming up. With this, are going to enjoy a win. We don't even get to talk wins all too often anymore here on Gators Breakdown, but it just, getting a sense of the fan base, whether it be Gators Breakdown Plus on Discord or whether it be on Twitter. I mean, you're kind of expected to win this, so that plays into it as well. But you don't think a win here changes anything. There's no grand narrative that it changes a win over Mississippi State. Even a 40-10 win or anything like that. It's not a big picture look at this thing being turned around. It's going to be nowhere near that. So I think almost kind of like Samford, you enjoy it in the moment, but at the same time, you don't enjoy a win in the big picture of things.
Well, I mean, look, losses to teams like Mississippi State used to be catastrophes for the Florida program. right? Because it was like a major upset. You're talking like a team that's a 40 or 45 point favorite going in and losing a game, and you go, "Wow, like that's an amazing thing that they lost that game." Was it Jackie Sherrill who beat Zook and sort of
That was Sylvester Croom's big first SEC win.
Croom? So I mean, like those sorts of games, you look at it and go, "Eek!" Like, but
and he won 8 games that year, and that was the game that got him fired.
Well, but in this game, I am like, it keeps Florida from being the worst team in the SEC. That's what it does. It keeps you out of the basement. And great, we're not in the basement. Like, but it's kind of like when they kick a field goal with 6 seconds left in a game where they're shut out and go, "Woo, the shutout streak stayed alive."
The Oregon State field goal.
Yeah. I mean, like, really? Like, go ahead and just get shut out. You deserve it. Like, you might as well earn it. Like, the streak doesn't mean anything if you do it just to retain it, right? And that's the same thing here, is that beating Mississippi State doesn't mean anything if it doesn't lead to anything else. And it can't lead to anything else because they're bad. And so, look, I mean, whether Florida's last place or next to last place, for most Florida fans, the answer is still not good enough. And, so yeah, I mean, I want to see Florida win. I don't want Florida to be last place in the SEC, but I also don't think that it matters in the grand scheme of things in terms of what's coming. And so that's what I mean when I say apathy, is it's not that people don't care about the Florida program. It's that the Florida program, because essentially after these first 3 games, a decision in fans' eyes has already been made. Whether the administration has admitted it or not, in the fans' eyes, a decision has already been made. Now it's just a holding pattern until you can analyze the next administration, and what happens in the previous administration doesn't really matter all that much.
Yeah, kind of going to your point. Here's the thought, Will. Dustin Bull comes in here. Florida's becoming Vandy 2.0. I mean, that is your point. That's the thought of Florida. A win over Mississippi State's not going to change that all too much. So,
well, I mean, I don't know. We didn't beat Vandy 2 years ago, so.
Oh yeah. And they got to win over Virginia Tech this year. Anything better than Florida has right now. Now I think they lost I think Vandy lost this past weekend, if I remember right. But either way,
but they beat Virginia Tech. So I'm not sure this Florida. I wouldn't take Florida over Virginia Tech right now.
No, Antoine Powell-Ryland would be getting payback, living in the backfield.
17 sacks.
Yeah. Well, I told you we would bring this up just a little bit, but also there's another comment here. Kingsico, I think that's how you say it. Hey, Dave and Will, is there a reason why Billy Napier wears black every game? He has worn orange and blue. Has never worn orange and blue on game day. Well, he did wear a blue rain jacket the other day. But yeah, for the most part, he's in black. And I decided to wear black because this is a funeral going on right now. So I am wearing black, as it's what the feeling around Gator Nation right now. This thing is over. So I thought black. It was done on purpose. I am wearing black on purpose because, for going to your point, Will, all intents and purposes, it's over.
I mean, I've been talking about deposits and withdrawals for a really long time in terms of Napier taking a bunch of withdrawals from the Bank of Trust. But in many ways, the Miami game, especially for me, is like when someone cheats on their spouse. Like, there's no coming back from it. Like, it wasn't like, oh, we found out that he lied to us about something. It wasn't like, oh, we found out that he charged a little bit too much on the credit cards. Like, no, this was like a fundamental breach with me. And I even told you when we got off the air, I was like, this is it, man. Like, if he leaves me out there hanging, I'm going balls to the wall against him. And I mean, look, I wish the best for Billy Napier. But one of the things that I wrote in my recap article after A&M, which didn't really even talk about A&M, was that what we have found out in the first 3 games this year is that Billy Napier is not going to take Florida where we want a Florida coach to take Florida. And for people who go, well, you got rid of Dan Mullen, I'm like, well, we knew at the end of that era that Dan Mullen wasn't going to take Florida where we want a Florida coach to take Florida. And so there are sort of 2 arguments that you can have in this case, right? You can have an argument that, well, we need to have stability and, you need to give people time and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure we'll get into that later. And the other argument is you just keep churning, right? And that there's only so many Kirby Smarts and Nick Sabans and Urban Meyers and Steve Spurriers out there. And when you find one, do all you can to keep him there. But you got to find that guy. And if you hold on to a mediocre coach for 5 or 6 years, you've prevented yourself one shot at finding that guy. Now, there is the balance of that, of the buyouts that you have to pay.
Yeah.
And so that certainly factors in as well. But, it's interesting to see sort of, or at least to think about. And at this point, it's just a thought exercise, right? In terms of who's next and where we're going from here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So plenty to get into right here on this episode of Gators Breakdown. Everybody, hit that like button, smash it right now for us right here on this YouTube version. Subscribe, also right here on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. And of course, hey, few new members in the last few days. Thank you so much for joining Gators Breakdown Plus. That link is in the description. The Discord is, man, I'll tell you, it is very active right now with a lot of conversation, of course, mainly focused on Billy Napier and the situation there, of course. That's just where Gator Nation is at right now. The polarizing, the topic that is. Extra episodes, those chat episodes, did a chat last week. We'll do another one this week, of course. Newsletter, giveaways, all that good stuff. Gators Breakdown Plus. Link is in the description. All right, let's get it going, guys. After, of course, speculation all week if Billy Napier would be fired. He took to the podium on Monday, much to the dismay of many of Gator Nation that already want him fired, of course. So there was all kinds of rumors and such. He would be fired Sunday or Monday, or that it's imminent, and Texas A&M could be his last game as Florida head coach. Not to be at the press conference there on Monday, of course. So here's what the head coach had to say about the loss to Texas A&M, what he learned from that, and his job status.
Obviously, Saturday was very disappointing and frustrating. I think it's important for everybody to know, personally taking total ownership of that. Everything that happens within our team and our organization is my responsibility. So we need to do much better. The film is a combination of mental errors, fundamental and technique issues, and then some decision making. There's no doubt that we can help the players and try to put them in better positions at times. And then I think it's one thing to know, but we also have to go apply, and I think that's kind of where we're at from a player perspective. And I think as teachers, we have to take a good look in the mirror of our weekly process, and I do think there's no excuses. There's no place for blame. I think responsibility, accountability is the only option here. So the most important thing, and I told the players after the game Saturday, is that they stick together. I think their camaraderie, their relationships as teammates, this will pass, and then they're going to have these relationships 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And it's important that they stick together and they do their part as teammates.
Have there been any discussions or you've been told anything about your future?
No, none.
Do you feel like there's still a path to earn a fourth season if the team can get it together and
Yeah, 100%.
get on a roll?
100%.
Were you given any assurances like when you got here, because it's a 7-year deal, and
Right.
you've talked a lot about the process, the rebuild, the challenges of it, that you were going to be given X amount of time to do this?
Yeah, I mean, these are all hypothetical scenarios, I think for me, I'm going to try to model what I would expect from our players, okay? And some of those things I just talked about, I think that's the whole key, is that as a staff and throughout the organization, we have to do our part to model what we would expect from the players and want from the players. And that, for me, is total focus on the next opportunity to improve, right? So, we're going to put the game to bed today from Saturday, and then it's about doing my absolute best to prepare the team to play next Saturday. And we can't live in the shoulda, coulda, woulda, if, then, all that. I think ultimately we got an obligation to the players and our leadership at the university to do our best to play well this week. That's all we can control. Anything else is a waste of time, and look, I think it's that way regardless. We all been doing this for a long time. The ability to hit the reset button. Sometimes you're trying to ignore the hype or the praise and And then sometimes you fall flat on your face and you're trying to – so your approach with the players, the right mix of accountability and ownership. I think it's critical that we don't point fingers and that we accept some responsibility and point out where there needs to be accountability. I think that's the key, especially with young people in the world that they live in currently.
Well, if he did have a conversation with the administration or somebody wanting to, make a move or anything, I don't think we would have heard about it like this at a press conference from Billy Napier. So that was not going to be the process whatsoever. So I will ask you, were you surprised that he was able to take the podium today? That he wasn't fired on Sunday, even if it went into today, that Billy Napier wasn't let go after Texas A&M.
I mean, a little bit, but I also think that it's one of those things where, there's no giant rush so long as the players are bought in, right? I mean, that's always the question is if the players have quit, then you'd probably make a change. But if the players are still bought in, then, why do you need to, right? I mean, things might get worse. That's certainly true, but things might get worse if you make a change too. And I think you probably say, okay, what's best for the players in this situation? Not necessarily what just quiets down the noise, because what's the option, right? I mean, that's the other question. I mean, everybody, when it comes to getting rid of Napier for years now, or for, over the offseason at least, has said, well, who are you going to get if you let him go? Now, obviously, we've all sort of heard all the names people have mentioned behind the scenes. At the same time, I think you can ask the same question about an interim, right? Who are you going to get who's going to make it any better for the program or the players? Could you find someone who does it better? Maybe. But, it's not like you're saving any money by letting him go today as opposed to tomorrow or next week.
We've already seen the reports. $26 million has already been raised. So,
well, I mean, and he's getting paid regardless, right? Like whether he works or whether he doesn't, he's going to get that money. It's not like the buyout is this magical thing that goes down after four or five more games. So, I mean, yes, I am surprised because in the past, when the noise has gotten this loud, the administration has made changes. Like when you think about the stuff with Jim McElwain, there was a lot of noise around that. They could have stuck by him till the end of the season. They chose not to. But again, that was before the Georgia game, right? When you think about Dan Mullen, the noise was really loud, but that was after the Samford and the Missouri game, which were towards the end of the year. Now we're talking in the third game of the year. And so, these guys have all prepared all offseason. And, I think one of the things that I said early on this offseason, I know I said it here, was that I wanted some certainty about whether Napier was the right guy or the wrong guy. And 4-9 meant no certainty, or 4-9 meant lots of certainty. 9-4 meant some certainty. 6-6 meant we were going to be back in this argument.
Yeah.
And if not, and look, I'm not taking any joy in the fact that we're getting certainty, but we're getting certainty. And if you come out of the UCF game at what was the fourth game? If you come out of that, at 1-3, or I guess you'd be 1-4 at that point.
Mississippi State,
Mississippi State's fourth game. So if you come out of that at 1-4, or even 2-3, I think you've got your answer, right? And so I can understand why there would be people who are still saying, let's let him have the opportunity to turn it around so that no one can say we didn't give him that opportunity. But yeah, I mean, I'm surprised. I especially after you had folks like Nick De La Torre and some other folks saying that there was a board of trustees meeting on Sunday morning that was scheduled. I don't know whether that was true.
Well, I mean, like I said, it was reached out to me. I reached out to Nick. He's like, yeah, I'm about to publish a story now. So I was hearing it. He was hearing it. Part of that, too, is, look, I still think there were conversations. I know Pat Forty came out and said no board of trustees meeting was happening and it has to be official, blah, blah, blah. Conversations happen.
They all have each other. They all have each other's cell phone numbers.
Exactly. I mean, believe me. There was conversations by the important people that needed to have the conversations happening on Sunday morning.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, yes, I think there are. There are a lot of machinations going on, right? And honestly, one of the arguments going on in Twitter right now, from people who pay a lot of attention to the program, if you go listen to Bud Davis and some of the things he's talked about, there was an article today, I can't remember who wrote it, but it was on 3, where they were talking about the UAA specifically and sort of some of the limitations maybe there, some of the holdovers from the Foley administration, and questioning whether those are the people who should be held accountable, at least in conjunction with Billy Napier and in conjunction with Scott Strickland. Obviously, you have the Strickland piece, right? And so there's a lot of different decisions that need to be made by the people who are in charge of the finances and in charge of all these sorts of things. And I think it's wise to take your time in the third game of the year to make those decisions. But I also I'm still surprised. I figured they'd pull the trigger and trust the people they have in place. I think the fact that it's taking a little bit more time probably means that there's some discussion going on about who's actually making the decision and who's going to have authority within the framework of the organization going forward with whatever they decide to move forward with.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, if the decision was made Saturday night, Sunday morning, or whatever, I mean, yeah, there's going to be some things. A lot of it comes into play too. Of Florida's got a road game against Mississippi State this week. There's a bye week the very next week. A timeline may even make more sense to wait. Just on that. Do you want to try and make a coaching change when just 6 days from your last game, you got to go take a flight from Friday, and go play Mississippi State? It just might be a whole lot easier to keep the path going as well. Look, it maybe show somewhat respect to Billy Napier. I mean, even if we think, how this thing plays out, if you don't think he's going to survive, as you said, Will, should there really be any rush to do it? All the other things, showing respect to Billy Napier for things. We know he's well liked in the administration office. I mean, does most things the right way. Now, I know the Jaden Rashada thing got brought up in the chat. Maybe how that comes back up, and maybe can you spin that thing for calls and all that kind of thing. I mean, believe me, we've heard it all. Of like, what? Well, maybe it hasn't been announced because they're still trying to get their ducks in a row on other items that have been discussed, of course. So, but right now would not have been. I probably would have Saturday night. I would have leaned, probably let go on Sunday. But not necessarily anything concrete to say that was going to happen. That was just going to be a pure guess at that point. Of course, was getting messages left and right all day Sunday, even Monday morning that, hey, can still happen. But once Sunday came by and Florida released that, hey, the press conference is going to be at 11:45. The later into Sunday, you kind of knew it wasn't going to happen. Anything saying that was going to happen Monday to me was kind of a stretch. First of all, there's no way it stays under that long in today's world. I mean, as soon as players know, it's going to get out. So there's no way players, he tells players and it stays in a locker room or anything like that. So, yes, more time went on. There was just nothing going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the deal. When you have an employee who's terrible, like terrible from an attitude perspective and terrible at their job, or maybe even they're good at their job and you don't like their attitude, and you decide to let them go, those are the people you walk out the door, right? You go, we'll send your personal effects to your home. We don't need you talking to the other employees. We're separating because this is a toxic environment. There's never been an inkling of that with Billy Napier, at least with the people who are in the program. And so, for those people that you let go, that you respect, oftentimes you give them a severance. Oftentimes you give them some amount of notice before they have to leave, whether it's a couple of weeks or a month or whatever it is. And so in many ways, I think you probably need to think of it that way, right? Is if you're a fan and you're trying to process what's going on and when will it happen and all that sort of stuff. It's like, look, there's enough conversations that you've had and I've had that the people who matter have lost confidence in the ability for this thing to turn around. And that level of not having those folks not having confidence means that the whole thing is over. It's just a question of when and do you do it, and is there a humane way to do it where it's not quite as insulting maybe as on the tarmac like Lane Kiffin at USC. Because look, I think there is something to be said for when people have been good ambassadors for your program, you do need to treat them well. And all the people who are there with Billy Napier are also going to be looking for new jobs if Napier goes as well. And so you've got all those different things that go on. And now you've got a team that 3 games in has a staff that isn't really focused on what's going on. And so, from the standpoint of providing the best experience for the players, and because look, the transfer portal ravages programs whenever there's a change. But I would still say probably 50 or 60% of these guys are going to have an opportunity to stay behind and continue to play. Even and that's because I think 40% of them will probably decide they want to play elsewhere, not because they'd be forced out by some new administration. That's probably some of it too. And so these guys still need to develop. They still need to get better. They still need SEC reps. They still need to play those sorts of things. And you're only going to get DJ Lagway for 3 years, assuming that he stays with the program. He needs to be ready to go game 1 next year. There's stuff that they can do right now to prepare the program, even if Billy Napier's not in charge. And I think maybe that might be the focus and why there's been a little bit of a delay here.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to dig the head in the sand here. A lot of people are worried, well, what if he goes to Starkville and gets a win? Will they really fire him after a win? So, I mean, I think that plays into it from a fan perspective too. Look, in the end, I think, like as you said, Will, the confidence is kind of already lost in the end. I don't think that really matters. It's going to take a miracle for him to dig out of this. I think most people know that's where this is at right now. So 10% chance that this all works out, and all these podcasts and articles the last couple of days from every angle, national, local, everything in between is all for naught.
He would have to start DJ Lagway and run the table to the Final Four. Like, that is the only thing. And even then, I'd be sitting here going, fool's gold, fool's gold, fool's gold. But that's it. It's the only possible way is DJ Lagway comes in and they run to the Final Four. And that means they're beating Georgia, Texas, and Ole Miss. They're winning the SEC championship. And they're winning in the first round, or I guess the second round it would be, because winning the SEC championship would give them a first round bye, and they're winning in the second round game in the playoffs. Like, that's what it would require. That's what would be required for Billy Napier to stay.
As George says right here, Florida will probably end up 10-2.
George is always good for some optimism, man.
There we go. And then
always good for some
optimism. He follows that up with 15-2. So there we go, George.
Hey, I'm rooting for it. Honestly, I'm rooting for it. If
how fun would that ride be?
Oh my goodness, we'd be
go these conversations to that.
Well, so we had somebody on X asked me the other day, like, have I ever covered a team that actually won some games since I started this? And it's like, well, the Mullen teams won a few.
2018 through 2020.
2019, 2020. 2020 was fun till the Marco shoe.
Right. I mean, still disappointing. Go back and look at it. Still a disappointing year. But
yeah, but it's one of those things. Like, I remember the most poignant loss ever in Florida history to me, and this is just because of where I sort of sat in when I was there and those sorts of things, was the Jordan Reed fumble game where it was the 5th turnover against Georgia. And if they'd have been able to pull that one out, then that team's playing for a national championship. And for whatever reason, that is the game that just killed me. And, but that was a really enjoyable season with Wilmot's champ in 2012, right? And so I can get over
one of my most fun seasons.
I can get over the enjoyable seasons where I get kicked in the nuts later on. It's the ones that are just a slog from day one that are the tough ones. And it's like 2013 falls in that camp where all the injuries and Driscoll goes down with the broken ankle and everything just turns into a disaster. The whole team ends up on IR. And then you have, the 2017 season with the Shark all of a sudden turning into the big story.
And even that point, well, I'm glad you brought that up. I brought that up in the Discord today. Even with the bad seasons, this is as early as we have felt out of it completely, because you would usually still get that win over Tennessee early in the season, no matter how bad of a season you had.
Well, it helped that you opened up with like Chattanooga and the Citadel. Then you played Tennessee, who you always beat.
Right,
so exactly. They're 3-0. Oh, absolutely, man. I mean,
even that plays into it. Like, the season wouldn't fall apart till later on. Like 2017, you got kicked in the face by Michigan, only to have the miracle win over Tennessee a couple of weeks ago. Like, you still had something to say, all right, this will turn around, this will get better. that's why I said you go to this Mississippi State game and they're so bad. He says you don't have that right now. And year 3, when there was supposed to be so much progress, that's why it's so hurt and damning right now for Gator fans, is because this is the earliest I can remember feeling this hopeless about a season.
Yeah, it's been a while, man. I mean, so we've had some where it was the first season for the coach, where it wasn't necessarily the best environment. I remember after the Missouri game in 2018, feeling pretty hopeless after Felipe Franks just like looked absolutely helpless against the Tigers. Kyle Trask came in.
That's the point.
Well,
but the second half of the season, like we're 3 games in and we're done.
I don't know what you want me to say, Dave. This sucks. I hate it. Like, I wish the team was better, but it's not. And there's a whole lot of reasons why it is the way it is, but there's no reason why they should be this bad. And that in many ways is the most damning thing, right? It's not just that Florida's lost to Miami and lost to A&M. It's how they lost to Miami and how they lost to A&M. Like the Miami game, they came out and got dominated, but it's like, okay, well, maybe Cam Ward is a Heisman level quarterback. Maybe Miami's really good. A&M came out and just blew the brakes off of Florida. And that's a team that had their backup quarterback in as with their main quarterback as a late scratch. And it just looked, it looked like there was nobody on the other side, even who was really prepared to stop them. And you got blown coverages everywhere. Every running play seems like it's going for 8 or 9 yards at a minimum. That 99-yard drive where obviously they were helped out by the butt targeting, but still, they just ran it down their throat. Like A&M was not issues. Like, yeah, the exact same stuff. Like the play where, I don't know if you've seen it from the backside camera, where Emmitt Smith's kid runs and he sees Desmond Watson in the hole and he like just runs the other way. It's like a bunch of 4-year-olds out there. Like, how is there no penetration from the other side to wrap the guy up when he changes direction? And if it was just one play, I'd be like, okay, it's just one play. But that's pretty much the entire Gator experience on defense now for 5 straight years.
Yeah.
And it's worse this year than it has been the last 2. And I promised myself last year, after saying the defense couldn't possibly be worse as the reason for, there needing to be an improvement. I promised myself I wouldn't say that this offseason, and I'm not regretting that choice because, man, it's so bad.
Yeah.
It's just bad.
And look, earlier there was some frustration in the chat, but we got it all figured out. Vinny, thanks. I know. Believe me, I understand. We're all frustrated as Gator fans right now. But thanks for the support, all the support out there. It's unfortunate that we're talking about another loss, talking about another coaching change potentially right here where we're at right now. So I get it. Believe me, I get it. Emotions run high in times like this. I get it.
And it's funny because we talk about like the different stages of grief, or I talk about the different stages of grief. And last year, this team had you very emotional at the end of the year. That emotion has not.
Right, it wasn't all the team, but
no, but that emotion, we've gotten past that point. Gator Dave.
True. There you go.
Both
Good
past
point.
that point.
Yeah.
It's no longer this depression. It's now, we sort of got to the righteous anger, and now it's just acceptance. It's a matter of when is it coming? And we'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, tonight about why the hope is no longer there, right? Because I think that's important. I think it's important to say this is why. I think a lot of it is a lot of the stuff we've been saying now for 2 or 3 years, but the same time, that also means that the next guy who comes in, the next administration that comes in, we're not going to change the metrics. We're not going to change the analysis. That person is going to have to hit these benchmarks as well. Otherwise, we're going to give him crap too, and eventually go through the 5 stages of grief with the new guy as well. Hopefully not. Hopefully we're holding up a trophy and making fun of Kirby in a few years. That's really the vision.
All right. Plenty more to get into on this episode of Gators Breakdown, but this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Hey, look, life gets hectic. I understand it. Believe me, you got so much on your plate. It's easy to neglect self-care. Well, that's where therapy with BetterHelp comes in. Therapy isn't just about solving problems. It's about empowering you to become your best self and reconnecting with your inner strength. It's a journey of self-discovery and growth. BetterHelp brings therapy to you. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Gators today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gators. One more time, betterhelp.com/Gators to get 10% off your first month.
Hey, Dave, can I say something real quick? How appropriate that we have a mental health sponsor for this year. Like, as co-host, can I get like free BetterHelp? Like, what's I feel like I need it.
Purely coincidence, by the way, because as you know, with sponsorships, they don't just happen on a whim. So they're like, "Hey, we want to start this week, this day." And I'm like, "Okay, well, as you said, could not have been better. Could not have been. I guess more fitting." Just, I understand.
All right, I'm back to depression.
I'll give you some more info after the episode, Will. But for real, a lot out there. Look, personally, I know, not personally for me, but what it could do to help family members and friends who need it. So for sure, guys, if you need to help out there, BetterHelp, the way to go. One thing, the conversation you and I have got, we'll go back to the press conference a little bit, but this was after the game and a little bit today as well. And I know one thing that gets on your nerves, because the text messages tell me that. It's gotten to you a little bit, Will, and it's Dan Mullen. Wow, where was I going? Billy Napier saying this: the team he sees on Saturday is not the team he sees during the week. And I know this one's really hit home because it's been multiple times that you have brought that particular thought up. Look, for me, there's two ways to look at that, and it's worrisome either way. Problematic. The biggest one is you not being able to identify issues on your team. You thinking things are good when they're not really that good. I start with the trenches because that's been the biggest disappointment for me. Offensive line can't block or protect. The defense can't get any pressure. That's what we see on game days. So we go back to the preseason, and I share concern for the offensive line, and that was mostly in the pass blocking area, but this team can't run block either right now. That was supposed to be a strong suit of this team. We had heard about, hey, this defensive line can get some pressure. Well, maybe it's because of the offensive line, and you weren't able to identify a weakness in pass rush, because if there was success in practice because of that, that's a worry there, that you can't identify that there's a worry because your offensive line's bad, that there's no concern about a pass rush because you can't identify that in preseason. You can't identify that Monday through Thursday in leading up to a game. DJ Douglas, a name that was lauded all spring and fall camp, only to be a huge liability this season. We could just be looking at this staff can't properly analyze what it takes to play at this level. And then the other side of this is it could actually be true that this team is, for whatever reason, good on the practice field, and it doesn't translate to game day. There's no way for this staff to connect practice to game day. Maybe that's a change in themselves. Maybe that's a change in the players. Makes little sense to me, and I think unlikely to be the case.
So I don't believe them. I believe that's what I've basically said now for about a year. They were talking last year after the Utah game that they thought that everything was pretty uncharacteristic that happened during that game, and I was like, well, that can't be true, because I remember Napier saying something specifically after the Utah game, like we didn't have any of these issues in terms of like lining up and those sorts of things when they were practicing with like SEC officials earlier during camp. And I'm like, I don't believe you, because you know how to actually, like, if your players should know how to line up, they should know how to be able to get things set up. Same thing with the special teams. Same thing with a lot of the different mistakes that we've seen over the course of the start of this year as well. So, you're really talking about then it's either somebody who's not telling the truth or somebody who's incompetent. Those are the two, those are the two perspectives, and neither one is great, right? I mean, neither one is great. And yeah, I mean, I don't like that excuse that, or I don't even like the statement of, yeah, like Monday through Friday, we look great. And then Saturday we go out and lay an egg. And he's talking, the thing in the clip that you showed earlier is he talks a lot about accountability and responsibility, but where is it? Like, who has been pulled off the field when they haven't done the right thing? Who, when they bust a coverage, doesn't see the game again? Who, when they don't line up correctly? And he talked about that after the game, that they were struggling to get lined up. Well, geez, that's something we were like torching Todd Grantham for 3 or 4 years ago. So it's a consistent problem across the program. And the problem for Billy Napier isn't necessarily that all of these things are his fault, though he can say the buck stops with him. The problem is that he has gone through every single iteration of trying to solve that problem, and it just hasn't hit. David Wunderlich wrote a really nice article over at Gator Country where he went through all the different things, all the different folks that Billy Napier has brought over from Louisiana, players and coaches, and how none of those have worked out. And that the one guy that he's really brought in from outside of the Louisiana bubble is the new special teams coach. And all of a sudden the special teams looks good. It's like, maybe there's a learning experience here. And part of that is having somebody from outside who's seen excellent special teams, who's able to put his finger on the pulse and go, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it this way because this is going to actually deliver what we need to. Now, look, maybe the special teams will fall apart in the next couple of weeks and that won't look like some great prediction. But I think there's something to that, right? That Patrick Toney came from Louisiana. Austin Armstrong was a connection from Louisiana. Ron Roberts was a connection from Louisiana. William Piegler was a connection from Louisiana. Jabbar Jalouk was a connection. He's actually been a very positive, portion of the coaching staff that have come with Billy Napier. But, the reality is that if you hit on 20% of the coaches that you bring, that's probably an issue. And this is the third defensive coordinator because, it's pretty clear now that Ron Roberts is calling the plays. It's
Yep.
the third defensive coordinator. It's still bad. The offense is worse than it has been the past couple of years. And the offense was sort of middling the last couple of years. And this year it's bad. So everything has taken a step back. And
Will, can I pick up right there?
yeah, sure.
Because that was something I wanted to go on this discussion. And then Billy Napier was asked about it today in his press conference about, was he, once again, surprised? Was he surprised at the run game? Has it got going a little more? And his response, yeah, hence my frustration, as he kind of smiling about that. This was the last question of his press conference. He goes, so we got to do better in that area. It's one of the things that makes the engine go. We have to do better. Some of that is we got to look at what we do well. That's part of where we are. How do we generate some of that? But yeah, I think you're spot on. It's one of those things we've got to get better at. So once again, why is he surprised? I mean, that's the worrisome part of that. But how many times, granted, I'm in the camp of, I think you're better at quarterback and receiver than you are at running back and offensive line as a collective effort. So we know Billy Napier's offense. We know what he wants to do. But the problem with Billy Napier has been adaptability, whether it be NIL, whether it be transfer portal, and now with the offense as well. Look, I chronicled going into last year, and a lot of the losses, dating back to Louisiana, where we didn't have many, but Louisiana and Florida in that first year was Florida has to run for this many yards for Billy Napier to win a football game. And if he doesn't run for this many yards, it isn't going to happen because there's no adaptability. It doesn't matter if your quarterback throws for 300 yards. If they run for 46 yards, Florida's not winning the game because this is how he's built his offense. And there's just been no adaptability to it. And then once again, we're seeing it. He goes, this makes the engine go. This is what I want my offense to be. And it's surprising I can't get it going.
Yeah, the bigger problem there, and I think this does come to the adaptability, is the predictability, right? Like that when your offensive line is struggling, you can't have keys that allow the defense to know what's coming. And I just started at some point basically tweeting, they're in the pistol again. What do you think they did on first down? And there was somebody, I think Donovan Kaiser, said, take a drink every time you see a first down run out of the pistol. And I'm like, I think Donovan has a drinking problem. Like that is a problem that 65% of the time when they're in the pistol, they run. And
go back to Miami's defensive coordinators. quotes about the predictability of the offense.
Well, and so look, I love Bud Davis. He's the one who's really pointed this stuff out. But one of my followers tweeted back, "Look, I love Bud, but when a nerd on Twitter knows what you're going to run based on formation, and he's told you repeatedly in a public forum, maybe you should make an adjustment." And again, I think Billy Napier's forgotten more about football than I'll ever know.
Sure,
but I understand math and tendencies and predictability and all those sorts of things. And I know when they're in a pistol, there's one of two things happening. They're either handing the ball off to Montreal Johnson or they're going to run a flood. They're going to fake it to him. They're going to run around the corner and have a flood. And the defense knows that too. And so the thing that DJ Lagway actually opened up against Samford is they were able to do some things that weren't a flood or just a hand to Montreal Johnson. Now, the problem in this game is that, the play before the lightning strike was out of the pistol. DJ Lagway hands to Montreal Johnson, loss of 2 yards. And now you got your quarterback at 2nd and 12. You're not running play action on 2nd and 12. Like, you got to actually hit every once in a while on those runs. But if they're in the pistol and they know the run is coming and they can bring up a safety late to overload your box, your offensive linemen don't have a chance. And so the offensive line is not the most gifted group of people we've ever seen. They're not the best blocking offensive line we've ever seen. All of that is true. But when you sit there and tell the defensive line, it's like when you sit there at the plate, like there was a catcher in a minor league. I don't know if you saw the story, but there was a catcher in the minor leagues who just wanted the season to be over, and he was in the playoffs, and they needed to lose one more to be done. And he started telling the opposing hitters what was coming. And all of a sudden, his pitchers are getting teed off on. So I'm like,
I did not see that story, by the way. So I'm going to have to go look it up.
That was on ESPN, this minor league catcher's telling everybody what's coming. And I'm like, that's all Napier's doing is he's sitting there and he's going, hey, Miami, here it comes. We're in the pistol. It's going to be one of two things. And, if that's the case, if they know what you're going to do based off of the formation, you're doomed. And that is what Miami's defensive coordinator was talking about, is it's not necessarily like, I would guess that it's not 6 plays that Florida runs.
Yeah.
It's 6 formations where they have very distinct tendencies out of those formations. And so when they run that formation, the corner knows it's one of 3 routes that the receiver's going to run. And so one, he can guess, but then he also doesn't have to worry about all the other things on the route tree. And when you're that predictable, when they know what's going to happen, you're screwed. And so that Dan Mullen, for all of his faults, the one thing Mullen always did a really good job of was putting his players in a position where they could succeed, especially on offense, getting his players in a position to do what they do best. And Graham Mertz has limitations, but I don't feel like in the last 2 games that he's played that they've done a very good job of playing to his strengths. They've talked about driving the ball downfield. That's not his strength. And so trying to do it just to please other people is really a fool's errand. Same thing with DJ Lagway. I don't think they utilized him in a way that made a whole lot of sense. Like, one of the things you could have done was, instead of handing the ball off to Montreal Johnson, you could start running some either RPO or run option off of that pistol. And now it's a new look that nobody's seen on film before. But until they decide to do that, until they have a wrinkle, until they have something that's just different than what we've seen so far, we're going to see the same result, because they're telegraphing to the defense what's coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to throw a shout out to Liquid Flames here, because it hits on something that actually happened to me today with this same exact conversation. He says, I still think the quote, regardless of outcome comment was telling in the post-game press conference. Goes on to say, it tells me he doesn't adapt to the game plan based on the situation or the opponent. And what that is in reference to was using the 2 quarterbacks. And Will, I jokingly asked you last week, what if they did it every other drive? Little did we know that was actually what was going to happen. There was no, I will fully admit, there was no inside info there, guys. I was throwing out a hypothetical that actually came true.
It's the Facebook guy who called you Nostradamus. He was right.
Nostradamus too, by the way. It was, we were going to swap quarterbacks every other drive regardless of outcome. So it didn't matter. Now, I would have really loved to see what if Graham Mertz would have come out and it was 7-0 right away. Would he have still done it? Sounds like it. But what if Graham Mertz would have come out his very next drive and made it 14-0 on the 3rd drive of the game, if it would have played out that way? Now, granted, as Liquid points out, regardless of outcome. So maybe Billy Napier wouldn't have, but yeah, there's got to be a feel. There's got to be a change of what's happening in game. And we have said so many times, it doesn't feel like there's a great feel for the game, whether it be the predictable play calling, whether it be maybe not unpredictable, but like the reverse against FSU last year. Look, that wasn't predictable. But the feel of the game, Florida was running the ball down FSU's throat. You had them on your side, their side of the 50. You had the advantageous situation only to break that out. So it's just like the feel of the game. So going back to the quarterback rotation, going back to game calls, going back to game planning. Yeah, the feel is just not there.
Yeah, I mean, so look, the double reverse pitch back to the quarterback to try to throw it downfield is one example of trying to break tendency. But the other example is there was a play for, I think it was USC the other day when they were playing LSU, where they had a bunch of bubble screens out to the right, and they had the tight end running out that direction to block. And he took one, and then later in the game, they were down on their goal line, and they faked the bubble screen, and the tight end took one step out and then went downfield. And the quarterback hit him, and it was like a 12-yard gain. But Kirk Herbstreit on the broadcast was like, hey, that's a wrinkle off of something that they did earlier. And so when everybody's flowing in one direction, when you have been predictable in the past, it should give you an opportunity to have wrinkles off of that. That's one of the things that's been pretty disappointing. Obviously, Trey Wilson wasn't there on Saturday, but in the Miami game, at least, there was a lot of stuff that Florida did in the Georgia game and the South Carolina game and the Missouri game last year, where they moved Trey Wilson around and had him in a bunch of different roles over the course of that game, to a point where they got him matched up on some linebackers in some favorable situations, where Florida was able to convert third downs where they had him in the backfield as a receiver, where Florida was able to was able to throw screens out to Wilson and then flare out another receiver for the same type of screen and then use Wilson coming on the backside to get some sort of advantage there. I mean, I just can't remember the last time I watched Florida's offense, certainly not this year, and said, wow, that was a really creative way to use Trey Wilson, or a really creative way to use that particular player. And so to me, it's not the gadget plays that are the things I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is, okay, you always run a flood out of this particular formation. What is the offset to that? What is the thing that keeps the defense honest so that you can then get back to running the flood, right? And it feels like the only thing that Napier has is, well, I'll hand the ball off to Montrell Johnson and run it. And so the flood is the play action, and the flood is an offset of that. But what's option 3? What's option 4? What's option 5? We haven't gotten to any of those. In fact, I would say that the throw to DK, or not D, was it Badger? The throw to Badger for the touchdown was actually a really pretty play design. But it's the first time all year that I've really thought about, oh, that was a pretty play design. and until they get to that point, and I mean, again, at this point, I think it's probably too late, but it does point out what you're saying, which is the predictability and the non-adaptability and the idea that we're going to line up and run our offense regardless of who the opponent is, as opposed to going, this team has a weak star. We're going to isolate Trey Wilson on that guy. Or, hey, these guys are weak at defensive tackle. We're going to maybe install some trap plays to be able to take advantage of something straight up the middle that's a little bit more quick hitting, or whatever. Like, these guys have weak linebackers. We'll hit the tight ends, those sorts of things.
Well, it blows my mind that we look at recruiting and we take a look at it, and I think you've recruited, and especially with the transfer portal as well, you have a strong group of receivers, and you don't play towards it. You still play to, as you said, fallback, or the main part of the offense is give it to Montrell Johnson, and we're going to run the ball. And you haven't recruited offensive linemen for it to run that style. You've recruited better receivers. You have good receivers. I really like that room. Granted, there's issues in pass blocking too. We know that. But I'd rather change and adapt something in the passing game than running into a brick wall or running into just something that the offensive line can't do. And whether the quick passing game comes to mind, I know that's been brought up, and maybe that could be the next step with those weapons you have at receiver. I mean, I think we've seen with the transfer portal, DK and Badger Ricky Pearsall before that. They've been able to hit on some receivers. You have Trey Wilson, of course, your best playmaker. So I just think that the better part of your offense is everything to do with the passing game, and it's just not catered to it.
I think we can spend all night talking about the different things that they could do, but we're now
we know it's not happening.
We're now 30 games into the Napier era. We're not quite there to 30 games yet, but we're 30 games into the Napier era, and we haven't seen it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the thing that got me ranting about the Tennessee game last week, is that it's there somewhere, but we don't see it, and it's not good enough to do something once every 5 games or once every 7 games or once every 9 games. Like, you have to do it over and over again. And I keep just coming back, and everything that I read, everything that I write, everything that I'm trying to absorb here, I just come back to the old Bill Parcells quote, right? Which is, you are what your record says you are. And at this point, Billy Napier's record is abysmal, whether it's win-loss, whether it's recruiting, like considering that he was brought here to fix a recruiting apparatus that was lackadaisical under Dan Mullen, and the results have not gotten any better. The score certainly hasn't gotten any better. And I mean, Dan Mullen got fired after a bunch of 1-score losses in 2021. And I think that was the right move. I think we knew at that point that Mullen was not going to get the program where we wanted it to be. But I think we can say the exact same thing about Billy Napier. So we can talk about, why doesn't he do this? Why doesn't he do that? Why does he say this? Why does he say that? The reality is that it's too late to say anything. The only thing you can do is show it. And even in this case, it's getting really late to be able to say it. And that's just sort of where we are.
Well, we had a lot of other planned for this episode, but for sake of time, I mean, hey, look, sometimes when you are in this situation, the conversation just flows into a certain direction. So, look, everything that we had kind of planned to talk about will still hold true. Whether we talk about it next week, whether we talk about it with the inevitable or what seems inevitable firing at some point, those topics can certainly we'll save it. But things that I've heard the last couple of weeks is you can't keep firing coaches. What you brought up earlier, the stability angle, or it's going to coaching move is going to take another 3 or 4 years to rebuild. I guess we can say that stuff now. So a little bbit of a tease from whenever we get to all that stuff.
We got a bye week coming up, my friend. We have a bye week, so we'll have time to do it.
There you go. That is so true. The 2 bye weeks this year, of course, but certainly
it's longer than it's normally. I'm like, woohoo, the season's longer. This year, it's like, the season's longer.
Yeah, it's not 13 weeks; it's 14 weeks. So, but either way, it's what are you doing for the Mississippi State?
So my kid has a baseball game. So I'm gonna be in a baseball game. He's got a doubleheader on Saturday.
Okay.
So I'll come back and watch it on DVR with no doubt many messages on my phone, regardless of what's happening.
So you pretty much stayed away from your phone till like 4 or 5 o'clock.
9
or even later
probably.
That.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a long day.
Gotcha.
But usually that stuff doesn't happen. But I mean, it's Mississippi State. I was like, oh, no big deal. We can do a doubleheader. It'll be fine. It's a win. No big deal. It's mark it down. It's like, oh, yeah, not so much. And then I'm spending a lot of time watching other teams. Like, there's a team in Oxford I'm really interested in right now. There's a team up in Columbus I'm pretty interested in. There's a team in Columbia, Missouri that I'm interested in, so that I can make every argument possible that
so if you guys
he's not the right guy.
If you guys can link all this up, Will's hotboard's coming out.
So there's some other programs I'm watching, and I'll be honest, the saving grace to this year is that Florida State might be worse than Florida. I mean, they haven't played anybody yet. Like, none of these teams that beat them seem to be any good, and they look awful. So there is that saving grace that at least they're not sitting there at 13-1. And
because every other rival right now is
got it
humming. Georgia, Tennessee. LSU.
Yeah,
I mean, just
I'm searching,
Miami.
man.
Miami's already put it to you. So, I mean, yeah, that's, as you said, the only saving grace that we still can't really enjoy because of where we're at.
Well, I mean, so here's the deal, right? Is that I care about all of those things, but I'm not somebody who grew up where Florida was playing Miami. Like my
Yeah.
experience in Gainesville is not that Miami is this bitter rival that I just hate.
Yeah.
You know,
I just like Tennessee and LSU more.
Yeah. Well, I dislike Tennessee, I dislike LSU, I dislike Florida State, and I dislike Georgia. Like those are the four, right? And those are the four that I point to. Now that's still depressing because of who's coming up,
Yeah.
and what we're probably going to see. And it's entirely possible that Heupel might put up 80 on this defense.
And you know he will if he can.
Well, as he should, right? Like
they're going to vent all their frustrations from the '90s and Spurrier.
Oh, yeah.
That I'm not looking forward to. Look, I was already scared. That was one loss I had picked coming into the season already. I was already high on Tennessee. I wasn't high enough on them. I thought they would be pretty good this year. Granted, it's still early. They haven't played. Well, they played NC State, who's supposed to be a pretty good team, and shellacked them. But you can tell. It doesn't matter who they're playing right now. They looks like a team, at least in offense, on a mission.
Well, and I will say that my favorite moment of the weekend was when Ole Miss's quarterback came out and criticized his offense because they only scored 40 points.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, dude, that was terrible. How dare you throw for 300 yards, score 40 points, and be offended by it. So look, yes, Florida has a long way to go. At the same time, like one of the reasons why everyone's taking so much pride or so much joy in Florida being down is because Florida means something to this conference and has been a bully for a really long time. And it's fun when you're the bully. It is fun when you're the bully. It's not so much fun when somebody punches the bully back. And one of the things that you got to decide is, are you going to fold or are you going to stand up and say, no, like we're actually going to fight? And I think in many ways, that's actually maybe the frustrating part about Napier is he talks about things being frustrating, but it doesn't sound frustrating. Nothing changes on the field. And so it's like, you just got punched in the mouth. Like stand up for yourself and go and crack some skulls and make the damn guys play better than they have before, hold them accountable and drive something forward. And that's just not there.
It's not there. Not there.
And
that's why I never bought into the back against the wall, wounded dog mentality. After the Miami game, you lost me on that. You should have had that game won, given all the conversation in the offseason.
So again, when I'm talking about these different teams that I might be watching for with interest, one of the things I'm watching for is, look, I hate Kirby Smart. I hate Georgia. But that halftime speech where he's like, it's 0-0, like step on their throat, like, you know, that sort of stuff, like that's necessary to be a truly elite program. Like that attitude is necessary. Now, whoever we bring in, I hope does end up like making sure that the players know how to use Uber. And, you know, that would be awesome. Like you don't have to do everything Kirby does, but you know, it's, you know, there are certain characteristics that I think we should look for in the next regime, and I'm interested in having somebody who's going to fight back, because that isn't something that we've seen recently.
A proven winner at this level. I'm just going to start there.
So not Jed Fish is what you're saying.
He is down my list. I know, because here's the thing about that, and this will be the last thing. Jed Fish, and then I still get people telling me Kerwin Bell. I had somebody telling me Steve Spurrier Jr. I'm like, if these guys were not Gators, you wouldn't give them a second thought. And I know there's this thought out there, oh, there needs to be Gators on this staff. And, you know, they need a Gator leading them. Who's qualified? You don't just give it to somebody because they're a Gator. There's nobody qualified for this head job. I mean, Jed Fish, if you get to him, you have probably missed on at least a few others. And if, you know, I know Shane Matthews said it this morning on his show, the same thing I've heard, boosters are leading this. If it happens, Napier's let go. Sorry, you know, the boosters aren't settling for the next Billy Napier. It's a proven at this level target.
Well, here, I'll give everybody a little bit of fire for me then on this one. So I grew up in Indiana, which means that if you're a football fan, you either are a Notre Dame fan or you're a fan of whoever's playing Notre Dame. And so 1993 was the year that Charlie Ward wins the Heisman, and he goes up to South Bend. I think it was in South Bend, and they lose to Notre Dame, but then Notre Dame loses the next week to Boston College, and Florida State goes on to win the national title. So I won't say I was like a diehard Florida State fan, but they were definitely a team that I was paying attention to and rooted for a little bit. And then I moved down to Florida, and I went to Miami, Florida, and Florida State on college visits. And it really was Florida's the better school, but I'm kind of a Florida State football fan. Where should I go? And I went to Florida, diehard Florida football fan. The minute I go there, it turns out that once you get associated with a program in a certain way, you like, and I think it's the same way with a job, right? Like if somebody pays you enough, you don't care whether they were your enemy originally. And, I think the same thing will happen with whoever Florida brings in. So I agree with you on that one. It doesn't matter if they're a Florida alum or if they've played in the Florida system. Look, I mean, if they're a Florida alum and they're the best candidate for the job, awesome. Like,
Right.
But I don't even think that's a tipping point. It's not like, oh, we're tied and this person has Florida ties. It's like, no, who's going to be cutthroat? Who's going to go on the recruiting trail and tell somebody that they should come to Gainesville instead of Athens? Who's going to be the guy who stands up to Kirby and punches him in the mouth instead of just consistently being stuffed in a locker? And those are the things they should be looking at, as opposed to, is this person a Gator? Because you know what the truth is? If they bring in a coach who turns this thing around and wins a national championship, you know what that guy is? He's a Gator. And he's a Gator for life, man. Yeah. So it doesn't matter where he went to school.
Yeah. Right. A lot of people look at Urban Meyer as a Gator, because of what he did. Now, granted, he had his other stops afterwards and stuff, but there's still many out there. I know not everybody does. Again, I'm not trying to speak for everyone, but there were people who put that, him in the Ring of Honor or something like that. I mean, he's a Gator. I've heard it. I've seen it. Yeah, you're right. It's have some success, you become one.
Yeah. So that's what I'm looking for, man. A boxer. Somebody's gonna punch back.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Acceptance, man. We're in acceptance.
We are. That is exactly where we're at. Anything else?
Mississippi State preview this week, everybody. Yeah. I'm sure for the 17 people who are going to read it, I appreciate your patronage.
Yeah. How many times we're going to hear this week this team got blown out by Toledo, by the way. So
well, hopefully next week we're hearing they got blown out by Florida, for the love of God.
Yeah. True. Yes, absolutely. That's what I want to help. That is what I want to see on Saturday.
I can't for the life of me root against him, man. Like,
no, heck no.
It's just not possible. It's not in me. Like, it's not in my DNA. I want to see him do well every week. And I even wrote that they were going to lose by a couple of touchdowns this week. And then it started going that direction. I'm just like, oh, like I wanted to be wrong.
Yeah.
Like prove me wrong. But anyway.
All right, everybody. Will Miles, readreaction.com. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.